Hey there, welcome to the Leadership Snapshot Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Sarah Andreas. My guests are everyday leaders, and in each episode, we discuss leadership experiences, lessons, and we look behind the scenes to inspire your leadership growth so that you can make an impact. So stick around. We have a lot of people to talk to. Hey everyone, it's Sarah. Welcome back. And today my guest is Dave Cupery. And the cool thing about Dave is he actually started his PhD journey with us at the same time, and he is in process to finish up his PhD. So he's as passionate about leadership as I am. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So if you don't mind, tell our listeners a little bit more about yourself and what are you working on right now?
So I teach intercultural studies at Manhattan Christian College. So most of my work is going into teaching and trying to keep up with classes. But some of the research that I'm working on has to do with how your worldview impacts your leadership.
Oh, that is so awesome. Are you excited about it?
I am. So for me specifically, I served, I was a missionary for a season of my life. I lived in Eastern Europe. And so the opportunity to study leadership through the lens of how your leadership is impacted by going into a second culture is really exciting.
So how long were you a missionary?
So first, let me say we never consider ourselves real missionaries because real missionaries are people that go to, hard places to live. And when we moved back to America, our kids thought we were moving back to a third world country. So we lived overseas. We lived in the country of Estonia for about 7 years.
Wow. Just a question. How did you get involved in missions?
Mm-hmm. So a really long story short is relationships. Estonia is a very small country. It has 1.5 million, a little bit less than that people. And for a long season of our life, God just kept bringing relationships of people that connected us with the country of Estonia, leading to relationships with a pastor and several other Estonians. And it just was kind of a natural process for us that I was in youth ministry before we moved to Estonia, and we were part of training and equipping young leaders here in the States. And as God kept bringing these relationships into our path, it was just really clear that there was this really unique opportunity for us to train and equip young leaders in Estonia.
That's amazing. So you came back to the United States, and then what'd you do?
My wife laughs that my wife says that we look like we have a military background. We don't, but we've moved around a lot. I was on staff at a church in an adult ministries role. And then I was on staff at another church in mobilizing people into missions role. And now I teach.
Wow. And you have how many children?
2 children. Both are, one is graduated from college, and he and his wife are in process of going into the mission field. And then we have a daughter who works full time.
Wow, that's amazing. I know you'd posted about your son getting to go into the missions, and I thought that was really cool. And he's kind of following in you guys' footsteps.
Except for he's going to be a real missionary. They're going to try and go someplace that's more in the unreached, unengaged area.
Wow, that's cool.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So the question I ask everybody who comes to my podcast is, what was the biggest leadership lesson that you had to learn?
Personally?
Yes.
Okay. So I think the biggest leadership lesson for me personally, I was going in a different direction, and now you said personally. Now I have to rethink this a little bit.
Well, okay. All right. So let's start with the other direction, and then we'll come back to personal.
Well, I think they can tie together. I think for me, one of the biggest leadership lessons that I had to learn is that that leadership is more about character than capacity. So when we served on the missions field, we were a part of helping to build an organization that trains and equips young leaders. And I think the draw, as we started to engage with the different leaders that we were engaging with, was to look at the perceived capacity of that leader, to look at their skill set, and and continually go, oh man, this person has so much potential because of a skill set that they offered. And when we did that, or especially early on when we were trying to do some of the ground level first leaders that we were trying to change the first leaders that we were trying to train and influence into our organization, we got people with really high skill set that were coming in, and they were working in the church. But over time, we just continued to see them not pan out, to not really bring influence to the churches they were at, or maybe the country level type things that we were looking for. And as we wrestled with this and realized, man, we need leaders of character. I mean, I know it sounds silly because we're missionaries, right? And we're Christian, and you would think character would just kind of be this underlying value that you look for. But I think I was so enamored with potential ability that I lost the importance of character. And as we went through time, and we started to put the right leaders in place, right, time and time again, we saw that leaders with character made lasting impact. And I look at, I mean, we've been back in the U.S. We came back to the U.S. in 2008, so we've been back in the U.S. for just a little over 10 years. But when I look at even the national organization that remains in Estonia, right, it's the leaders with character that were developed that have had long-lasting impact and have generation of leaders underneath them. And some of the other leaders who, we initially were trying to pull in because of maybe their perceived capacity or their perceived skill set, many of them I don't even know where they are anymore. And so I think for me, I would say that's probably one of those incredible lessons that was probably makes sense when you look at it from a distance, right? But when you get into that situation where you're trying to invest in people, where maybe the tease of ability, sometimes it's easier to get awed by that than being reminded of the importance of character.
That's awesome. So just for our listeners, when you say the word character, what's underneath of that?
That's a great question. So when I'm using the word character, I'm talking about right, the traits of who they are, the qualities of who they are. So integrity is going to be a part of their character. Honesty, truthfulness is going to be a part of their character. Ethic would be a part of their character. Those types of things are going to fit into their character.
Makes total sense. Okay, so are you ready for the second question?
Oh, yes, I'm ready.
All right. So what advice would you give to a young leader who wants to be the CEO or wants to be the person in charge someday and just not sure where to start or what to work on in order to get to that level eventually?
Mm-hmm. So before we hit record, we were talking a little bit about my research, and so the research that I'm doing and the research that I'm currently working on pushes to how worldview impacts our leadership. And so for me, in the context that I'm doing this research, I'm going to be discussing and talking with North American missionaries who are outside of North America. They're in a second culture. And one of the things that I hear from missionaries who are in their second culture is sometimes they're surprised about leadership decisions they make, right? And because they're in a second culture, they're trying to figure out how to contextualize their leadership. And one of the struggles that they have sometimes is is how to do that, how to take maybe leadership principles that they have and move those to a second culture. But one of the things that I think that I'll find as I continue to do some of my research, but I've also heard from missionaries is when we get in leadership situations, especially under stress, which would be a second culture situation, sometimes in our research, or sometimes what we revert back to is how we view leadership from our worldview, or how worldview influences our decision. And a lot of times we haven't really even thought through, or we haven't been pushed to think through, how did I develop my view of leadership? What were my influences on me, on my view of leadership? Why do I think, or why do I hold this value in leadership? Those are more shaped by experience, and that experience becomes our worldview, the lens that we look at leadership from. But not only the experience, the methodology of how to deliver that leadership. And so then when we get into a situation, instead of being able to contextualize the principle, right, we express the methodology. So, an example of that might be an American missionary who's we're very individualistic in America. That would be, how we operate, right?
Right.
And you go into a collective culture, a culture that has more of a community think, and you're trying to do leadership. And you might even understand that I'm in a collectivistic culture, but all of a sudden, you're in this culture, you're disoriented, and they ask you to lead something. And so it expresses, right, kind of, okay, I'm going to take charge of this. I'm going to do it. And already you've created some leadership challenges, right, because of your vocabulary that you use. And you're using I instead of we. And you're approaching it from how you as a person are going to do leadership versus how we are going to lead in this example. And you just don't even realize it because, right, it's the vocabulary that you use all the time when you're around your first culture people in leadership. I think another example, right, for me, when we went to Estonia again, so we went to Estonia in 2001, 2002, and Estonia had been free of the Soviet oppression for about 8 years at that point. But when we talk about leaders in America, like, we view leaders and we view that as a really positive, good thing, right? Mm-hmm. And there was this demotivator, this saying that was applied to like areas that were under communist ideology for a while, right? And the demotivator was the tallest blade of grass is the first to get cut. Right. Wow. And so there's leadership principle in there, right? Like the leader who sticks their neck out is the first one to get cut down. And so from my worldview, when I'm inviting people into leadership, especially early on, I think that's changed in the culture. But when I'm inviting people into leadership, I see it as opportunity. Right. But if I'm not using the right words, they're not hearing it as opportunity. Right. The culture, the people in the culture, I'm hearing it is like, you're asking me to stick my neck out. Right. You're asking me to take a lot of risk. And I don't even realize that because of how my worldview has shaped kind of even this word leadership in my mind.
Yeah. And so, you know what's interesting, Dave, is I think that applies here in the United States in business, and probably I can't speak about church, but I would bet it applies in the church realm as well, where our worldview shaped by experiences influences how we interact with people.
Yep.
So that's super fascinating.
Right. And what that unfortunately causes us to do sometimes as leaders is make mistakes that we're not even aware that we're making, because they're, from our lens, from our worldview, they're the right way to lead.
Wow. So here's the $1 million question then is, is how do you combat that? How do you help yourself not make those kind of mistakes?
Well, when I publish my book and make a lot of money, then we'll all know.
Okay, when you publish your book, I'm going to invite you back to the podcast and you are going to tell us what the answer to that is.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right, Dave, thank you so much for being a guest today. I really appreciate you taking your time to talk to us and share a little bit about leadership and about what you're learning.
Well, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
If you enjoyed this podcast, make sure you subscribe so that way you can hear new podcasts that come out every week. Embrace your journey, and we'll talk to you next week.